Page 85, September of 1853. Dear Austin, we traveled clear on down into Virginia today, though I'm not sure what day it is. On the road, you lose track of time. You also get mighty thirsty. We drink up a lot of the hiccup remedy, not on account of nerves, but from thirst. I sure wish we hadn't done that. That's just enough to ward off one more fit, I reckon. Got a ride from a school teacher by the name of Miss Millie Keck, who had a shiny black trap and a fine looking bay. Miss Millie invited us to take a seat beside her, if we cared for a ride. This was no easy matter, as if the seat was short and Miss Millie was on a beautiful side. It was about noon from the looks of the sun and hotter than a day in July in Sudbury. We had drank most of our water, and so we were much relieved to be given a ride. Luckily for us, Miss Millie was traveling almost 40 miles to visit her ailing mother. When she asked where we were headed, I told her we were visiting families down south. She gave us a particular look, but didn't say more. When we stopped to rest and water the horse, Miss Millie reached for a basket at her feet. I nearly fainted with hunger when she opened it, for the smell of buttermilk and bacon biscuits was too good to be true. Having had nothing to eat since the night before, Jupiter and I could have eaten that whole basket by ourselves. But before we had the chance to try, Miss Millie insisted that we offer some to William first, as he'd be offended if we were to eat without him, she said. Jupiter looked behind us, and I looked under our seat, as we were both wondering where this William could be hiding. He simply can't abide by bad manners, Miss Millie continued, nodding toward her horse. We turned our attention to the bay and then looked back down at the basket of biscuits. Neither of us had ever met a horse who cared one way or the other about manners, and we wondered just what they would look like. But Miss Millie didn't give us a chance to see, for she had already reached in the basket and was offering William a biscuit. Then she told us how special a horse her William was and how was named after a great poet. She recited a poem all about love and roses by an English fellow called William Shake something. She said that she liked his poetry so well that she had to name her horse after him. She reached back into the basket and fed William three more biscuits. We finally parted company at a crossroads, and Miss Millie pointed to the road leading south and told us that parting was such sweet sorrow. I shook my head, not knowing how to answer on account of I wasn't sure just she was so sorry about. But I sure knew I was sorry to see William eating all those buttermilk biscuits, especially since Jupe and I only got one apiece. We walked till twilight and didn't meet anyone else on the road. In the woods, we found a hollow that made a good bed. Jupiter is laying beside me, staring up at the sky. I wonder if he's thinking about Darcy again. I suppose he is. I'm thinking about her, too, and Miss Amelia back at home. I hope she isn't having any of those heart palpitations of her worrying about me. Well, the light is gone, and I best get some sleep for tomorrow's journey. Your brother, Levi. Page 89, September of 1853. Dear Austin, it's been a while since I could sit down to write you. We hitched a ride on the back of a preacher's buggy that took us a long and bumpy journey through the state of Virginia. After that, we walked a few more miles before coming upon a good sized pond. We found a good old man sitting there in his wagon. He had driven us ridge into the water to tighten his wheels. Jupiter and I decided to have a swim to cool off. The old man smiled and tipped his corn shuck hat as we swam by him. Do you remember that old man Gizzards looked like? This old fellow had the same lathery looking face and red nose. He seemed friendly enough, sitting and picking at his teeth with a goose quill. But there was a curious smell about him. As we swam in closer to his wagon, we could see that his leg was stretched out afore him with a pant leg rolled up, bound to his leg with a string bound to his leg with a string were two live toads. I expect it seems a curious sight, the old fellow spoke up. He went on to tell us that his name was Fergus T. McGrath, and he explained how he had been bitten by a copperhead that very morning. 'Twas lucky for me I had my chickens in tow. He pointed to the crate of chickens in the back of his wagon. Fergus went on to tell us how he had killed one, slitting it down the middle, and then tied its entails over the bite. When the chicken began to turn cold, he threw it off and caught the toads, their bodies drawn the venom out. Fergus explained as Jupiter and I stared bug eyed at the toad, which still had some life left in him, for they would wiggle every now and then. I kept thinking of Plug Ugly and was glad that Possum was not there to witness their struggle. When the toads finally died, Fergus united the sorry looking things and threw them into the water. He said his bite was all cured, and to celebrate, he drove out of the pond and shared some dried beef and cottonseed tea with us. Be still on my heart, I said as I got a whiff of my dried beef. Jupiter looked at me and grinned. We were both thinking of Possum then. Be still on my heart, Ferguson repeated. Sounds like a song. Then he pulled a mouth harp out of his pocket and began to play. Every once in a while he'd stop and start to sing. Be still on my heart, my gal, and I had to part. It went in on like that, with lots of good rhymes. We traveled with Ferguson T. McGrath in his wagon for the next 2 days. He told us some good tales and he knew lots of songs. But as much as we enjoyed his singing and stories, I have to admit that we were sorry to leave him, for the company he kept was hard on the nose. After sharing a wagon with a crate of chickens, 3 piglets, and 6 ducks, the smell was mighty powerful. We had confined in Ferguson all about Darcy and how we'd hoped to find her. He told us about a slave at auction some 5 miles south of here, where we might look for her. But you must be careful, and Jupiter, you're best not to do the looking, he cautioned. He said he'd wish he could take us there himself, but he had pigs to sell. We understood and promised to be careful. When we betrayed ways, Ferguson seemed concerned and wouldn't let us go without giving us the rest of the dried beef, 2 turnips, and an onion. I felt so grateful for all he had done for us, and I wanted to give him something. The only thing I could have was an old turnip head. I will make another one for Reuben, I promise. Ferguson laughed when I put the stick into his wagon and said that it was the best exchange of turnips he'd ever had. By the time he left us, stink the critter's stink was all over our clothes, and we were desperate to find a creek or river to dunk ourselves in. We walked for a couple of miles but couldn't find one. As it turned out, that was lucky for us. What we did find was 3 young men who were sitting in the shade of a lucus tree. At first I was hoping that they might offer us something to eat, but we had got closer up to them. I could see that they had been sucking on a jug for a spell. Now take a looky here, one of them called out on seeing us. He had a round, poke-marked face under a straw hat and poppy eyes that reminded me of Plug Ugly. Who might be this little master and his slave be coming walking our way? He taunted. At first I thought they might all glug, gurgle, and no guts, so Jupiter and I just kept walking. Now you two stop right there, the man with Plug Ugly's eyes barked so loudly that my hair stood on the end. The others both turned to look at us as we stopped dead center in the road. He don't resemble a Muller nor an Ingram, neither, another one of them said. Whose house you from, boy? Who's your daddy? I don't recognize your feathers none, or your feeders none. I tried to think of how I should answer this, but before I could, the tallest man stood up and put his hand on the other man's shoulder as he waved Jug in his hand. It's of no consequence, John Lee, whose house he might come from. He's a guest passing through Horn lands, and shall our mamma has taught us our manners. Why, it would be downright unmannerly of us boys not to offer him some refreshment. The other two laughed at this and got into their feet. Looks as if it's dark he might could be